In a tragic twist of fate, a newlywed's life is shattered after discovering a shocking secret about his wife, one that would lead to violence, betrayal, and murder. A.A. Collins, a transgender woman who had been keeping her past hidden, was brutally killed by her husband, Jason Collins. The case sent shockwaves through their community, raising difficult questions about identity, acceptance, and the impact of hidden truths. In this story, we explore how love and secrecy collided, leading to a heartbreaking conclusion. A.A. Collins, born Allen, was a 29-year-old librarian working at Noe Elementary School in San Diego. She was known for her compassionate nature, especially toward children, and had a particular passion for introducing them to LGBT literature. A.A. was a woman who had fought for years to reconcile her identity with the world around her. Having transitioned years before meeting Jason, she chose to keep her past as Allen a secret, even from her new husband. A.A. had undergone gender affirmation surgery long before meeting Jason, but she felt that revealing this part of her history would complicate their relationship. She had a quiet yet powerful presence, and her life seemed perfect on the outside, yet she was secretly carrying the weight of her unspoken truth. A.A. and Jason met in the fall of 2012 at a charity event for veterans in San Diego's Gaslamp Quarter. Jason was stationed at Camp Pendleton, and A.A. was immediately drawn to his military background and shared values, such as giving back to the community. They bonded over their mutual desire to help others and quickly became inseparable. Jason was a confident, well-built man with strong conservative values. Their relationship moved fast, and by early 2014 they were married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by friends and family. A.A., despite her secret, felt that she had finally found the life she had longed for, a loving husband, a fulfilling job, and acceptance in her community. But underneath this facade, A.A. was constantly worried about how Jason would react if he ever found out about her past. A.A. Collins, born Allen, had transitioned into a woman years before meeting Jason Collins. She had undergone gender affirmation surgery, hormone therapy, and made significant changes to her appearance, all of which had allowed her to live as her true self. However, her transition was a painful process, one marked by years of societal rejection and familial alienation. A.A. had distanced herself from her family, who had struggled to accept her as she was, and many of her old friends had abandoned her. By the time she met Jason, she was emotionally scarred and determined to keep her past hidden. Despite her deep love for Jason, A.A. feared his reaction if he found out that she had once been a man. She knew that Jason held traditional views about gender and relationships, and she feared his love for her might not be enough to overcome his potential disgust or anger. Although A.A. lived openly as a woman, she carefully avoided any conversation about her past. She made sure not to mention details about her childhood, family, or past relationships, and even when asked about her early life, she would redirect the conversation. As their relationship progressed and they became closer, A.A. considered telling Jason the truth, but each time she worried it would be too late or that he might reject her entirely. Her silence on the matter created a constant undercurrent of anxiety, as she feared that keeping this secret might eventually tear them apart. She hoped that once they were married, it would be a moot point and Jason would accept her completely. But this secrecy took a toll on her mental and emotional well-being. By the time of their marriage in early 2014, A.A. had convinced herself that Jason might never need to know about her past. She believed that their love was enough to keep the relationship stable and fulfilling. Yet, despite her best efforts to maintain an illusion of normalcy, cracks began to form. Jason started to press her about their future plans, where they would live, whether they would have children, and what their long-term goals would look like. The pressure to create a life with her husband that seemed perfect only increased A.A.'s anxiety. There was also the underlying tension of their differing worldviews. Jason, having grown up in a small conservative town, held very traditional values about marriage and gender roles. A.A., on the other hand, had spent years fighting for acceptance in a world that did not understand or fully accept her identity. Although Jason had never shown outright hostility toward LGBTQ+ people, A.A. was always unsure whether he would be able to accept her true history, even though he claimed to love her unconditionally. These fears haunted her, and she began to retreat emotionally, growing distant in her marriage. Jason's increasing involvement in conservative political circles also created some stress in their marriage. Conversations about religion, politics, and gender roles often left A.A. feeling conflicted, especially as she noticed Jason's views becoming more rigid. There were moments of tension where A.A. felt as though she was living two separate lives, one in the marriage and one where she still couldn't fully be herself. Despite these growing tensions, AA still tried to maintain a sense of hope, believing that somehow, over time, the truth wouldn't matter. But deep inside, she feared the day that the secret would come out, and that it might tear everything apart. On the morning of March 25, 2014, Jason Collins arrived at their apartment in Hillcrest after spending the night away with friends. When he entered the couple's bedroom, he was immediately struck by the sight of AA's lifeless body. She was lying on the bed, her body twisted unnaturally, and her face was bruised and contorted. The room was in disarray, with broken furniture, signs of a violent struggle, and bloodstains scattered across the floor. A lamp had been knocked over, and the once orderly space looked like it had been hit by a storm. Jason was immediately overcome with panic. He rushed to check for any sign of life, but it was clear that AA was dead. His mind raced, and he dialed 911, his voice trembling with fear and confusion as he described what he had found. Paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. AA was confirmed dead at the scene, the victim of what appeared to be a violent attack. Detectives arrived soon after, quickly assessing the scene. They noted the signs of a struggle and blunt force trauma on AA's body. The nature of her death suggested foul play, and investigators immediately began to treat the case as a homicide. Jason, who had called in the discovery of the body, was the first person to be questioned. Despite his apparent distress, the police could not rule him out as a suspect. At that point, no one knew the details of what had happened, but the case was beginning to take a darker turn. The discovery of AA Collins' body in her apartment on March 25, 2014, immediately prompted a full homicide investigation. Detectives arrived on the scene, and the crime scene was meticulously processed. The apartment was in disarray, which suggested a violent struggle had occurred. Broken furniture, disheveled bedding, and blood spatter across the floor painted a grim picture. There was also evidence of blunt force trauma to AA's head. She had been struck multiple times by an object, though it was not immediately clear what the weapon had been. Jason Collins, who had found AA's body, was understandably shaken and was quickly questioned. His account of events was that he had returned to the apartment after spending the night with friends, only to find his wife's lifeless body. He described feeling shocked and confused, and investigators noted that his distress appeared genuine. However, his actions leading up to the discovery were scrutinized. He had been difficult to reach in the hours before AA's death, and there were inconsistencies in his story. For instance, although Jason claimed to have been at a friend's house that night, some of the timelines didn't add up. There were witnesses who reported seeing him acting strangely in the hours before the murder. Furthermore, the police found no signs of forced entry, which led them to believe that AA's killer had been someone she knew. This narrowed the list of potential suspects, and Jason, as her husband, became the primary person of interest. The police also started to look into Jason's background and relationships, trying to piece together any possible motive. Was it a crime of passion? Was there something deeper at play? As investigators continued to dig into AA's life, they uncovered a detail that would send shockwaves through the case. AA had once been a man. She had transitioned many years earlier and had undergone gender-affirming surgery and hormone therapy. This information was initially hidden, as AA had never disclosed her transgender history to Jason. The discovery of AA's past became a pivotal moment in the investigation. Initially, detectives believed that AA's death could have been a hate crime or a random act of violence, but as they uncovered more, they began to consider the possibility that her transgender identity played a role in her death. The fact that AA had never told Jason about her past raised many questions. Was Jason aware of her history, or was he completely in the dark? And if he wasn't aware, how might this revelation have affected him? When the police approached Jason about this, he claimed to have never known about AA's transition. He seemed genuinely surprised by the revelation, though some detectives doubted his sincerity. The more they looked into Jason's reactions and behavior, the more it seemed as if he had been hiding his knowledge of AA's past. However, it also raised another question. Did Jason's ignorance about her past provide him with a possible motive for murder? Or was his shock and emotional distress genuine? When detectives informed Jason Collins of AA's transgender identity, his response was both dramatic and volatile. Initially, Jason appeared stunned, claiming he had no idea about AA's past. He broke down during the interrogation, oscillating between disbelief, anger, and grief. His words to detectives, "How could she lie to me about something so big?" were interpreted as evidence of deep betrayal. Over the days following the revelation, Jason's demeanor shifted. He began to express feelings of humiliation as he saw AA's decision to withhold her past as an affront to his trust and manhood. Friends and family described Jason as as a man grappling with an identity crisis of his own. He reportedly confided in his best friend Paul Reed, saying, "I don't even know who I married." However, his reaction raised red flags with investigators. Jason's initial grief appeared genuine, but the growing anger and resentment in his statements made detectives consider whether his emotions were masking guilt. A psychological profile conducted during the investigation revealed that Jason had a history of emotional volatility. This detail painted a complex picture of a man whose reaction was not just about betrayal, but also fueled by personal insecurities and societal pressures. Laura Martinez, AA's longtime confidant, was quickly drawn into the investigation due to her close relationship with both AA and Jason. A prominent figure in AA's life, Laura had been AA's support system during her transition and was one of the few people aware of her transgender identity. Detectives uncovered text messages and emails between Laura and AA that hinted at unresolved tensions, particularly around Jason. Laura had harbored strong feelings for AA, and their romantic past, though long over, seemed to linger in subtle ways. Witnesses reported seeing Laura visibly upset at AA's wedding, and several of her friends confirmed that she had difficulty accepting AA's choice to marry Jason. These details painted Laura as a potentially jealous figure who might have been motivated by resentment. Complicating matters further, Laura had been seen spending time with Jason in the weeks leading up to AA's death. Investigators discovered flirtatious text messages exchanged between the two, raising suspicions of an affair. Could Laura's involvement with Jason have been an act of betrayal against AA, or was she attempting to manipulate Jason into ending his marriage? Detectives interviewed Laura multiple times, but her account remained consistent. She claimed to have had no involvement in AA's murder and expressed deep sadness over her loss. Without concrete evidence linking Laura to the crime scene, she remained a person of interest but was never formally charged. Paul Reed, Jason Collins' best friend, emerged as a pivotal figure in understanding the psychological and emotional landscape leading up to AA's murder. A childhood friend of Jason, Paul was known for his staunchly traditional views on family and gender roles. Throughout Jason and AA's relationship, Paul had expressed reservations, often making subtle but pointed comments about AA's appearance and demeanor, which he found unconventional. After AA's transgender history was revealed, Paul's influence on Jason became a focus of the investigation. Forensic analysis of text messages between the two painted a picture of a friendship that may have exacerbated Jason's feelings of betrayal. Paul often referred to AA's decision to conceal her past as disgusting and accused her of tricking Jason. In one message sent just days before the murder, Paul wrote, "You can't let her get away with this. She's made you a laughingstock." Investigators questioned whether Paul's words were meant metaphorically or if they hinted at a more sinister influence. Some psychological experts later suggested that Paul, intentionally or not, may have validated Jason's sense of victimhood, amplifying his anger. While there was no direct evidence tying Paul to the crime, his role in stoking Jason's emotional turmoil was undeniable. During Jason's trial, Paul testified as a character witness, attempting to downplay his involvement in Jason's thought process. However, under cross-examination, he was forced to admit that he had encouraged Jason to confront AA, though he claimed he never advocated violence. This revelation sparked intense debates about the accountability of friends and family in escalating domestic conflicts. The night of AA's death was fraught with tension, building on weeks of strained communication between her and Jason. According to Jason's later testimony, the evening began quietly, with the couple sharing dinner at home. AA seemed distracted, preoccupied with something Jason couldn't pinpoint. What he didn't know was that AA had spent the day composing a letter revealing her transgender history. She had intended to leave the letter for Jason to read after she left the apartment, fearing his immediate reaction. However, as the evening progressed, AA decided to tell Jason the truth face to face. At approximately 9 p.m., after a moment of quiet reflection, she confessed her past to him. Witnesses, including neighbors in the adjoining apartments, later reported hearing shouting shortly afterward. Jason's initial reaction, according to his testimony, was shock and disbelief. He accused AA of lying to him, asking repeatedly, "Why didn't you tell me? How could you keep this from me?" As the argument escalated, Jason's tone became accusatory and aggressive. He reportedly began throwing objects, overturning a chair, and shouting phrases like, "You've humiliated me." At some point during the confrontation, the altercation turned physical. Forensic evidence indicated that AA attempted to leave the room, but Jason blocked her path. The struggle ended with Jason striking AA with a heavy object, later identified as a decorative lamp from their living room. AA suffered a fatal head injury, collapsing near the front door. Jason, now panicked, claimed in his initial police statement that he froze and did not immediately call for help. Instead, he spent hours sitting in silence before attempting to clean the scene. This delay in reporting the incident became a critical point in the prosecution's case against him. Jason Collins' arrest was a pivotal moment in the case, capturing national attention due to the complex dynamics surrounding the murder. After AA's body was discovered, Jason initially claimed to have found her lifeless upon returning home. However, investigators quickly uncovered inconsistencies in his story. Blood spatter patterns and forensic evidence pointed to Jason being the last person to have interacted with AA before her death. His fingerprints were found on the lamp that had been used as the murder weapon, and his DNA was found on various surfaces at the crime scene. Jason's arrest came 2 days after AA's body was discovered, during which time he had attempted to clean the scene and erase any traces of his involvement. Law enforcement officials became suspicious of his delayed response to the situation, as there was a noticeable gap between the time of death and when Jason made his phone call to emergency responders. The lack of any immediate action on his part raised further red flags. Authorities quickly moved to take Jason into custody. The media, which had been following the story with growing intensity, immediately seized upon the revelation of AA's transgender identity and Jason's reaction to it. Some outlets were quick to frame the murder as an emotionally driven crime tied to societal perceptions of masculinity, while others focused on Jason's personal turmoil after learning about AA's past. The case became a flashpoint for discussions about LGBTQ+ issues, particularly around the intersection of gender identity and intimate relationships. Once in custody, Jason's defense team tried to argue that his actions were the result of temporary emotional distress after learning about AA's past. They pushed for a reduced charge, claiming that the murder was unintentional and born out of an emotional breakdown rather than premeditated malice. However, prosecutors quickly refuted this argument. They presented evidence that Jason had been harboring feelings of resentment and anger toward AA for some time, largely due to his perception that she had been dishonest with him. His emotional instability, they argued, was exacerbated by a combination of personal, social, and psychological factors, culminating in the fatal confrontation. Jason's trial lasted for several months, with both sides presenting extensive testimony. The prosecution emphasized Jason's escalating aggression toward AA in the days leading up to the murder, pointing to threatening text messages, a volatile argument before the murder, and a history of emotional manipulation. The defense, on the other hand, portrayed Jason as a victim of betrayal, a man devastated by discovering that the woman he loved had concealed such a significant part of her life. They argued that Jason had not been in his right mind when he struck AA, implying that his mental state had deteriorated under the pressure of this shocking revelation. As the trial progressed, emotional testimony from both families painted a portrait of a young couple torn apart by a secret that ultimately led to violence. A's family expressed their horror and disbelief, recounting how they had supported their daughter through her transition and believed she had found happiness with Jason. Jason's family, meanwhile, described him as a kind and loving man who was not capable of intentional violence. However, their portrayal was challenged by the prosecution's evidence, which suggested that Jason had been mentally and emotionally disturbed by AA's hidden past. The jury deliberated for several days before reaching a verdict. Jason Collins was convicted of second-degree murder, with the jury acknowledging that his actions had been motivated by intense emotional distress, but not to the extent of absolving him of responsibility for his actions. He was sentenced to 25 years to life, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. This sentence sparked polarized reactions, with some believing that justice had been served, while others felt the verdict did not fully account for the complexity of the case, particularly in relation to the societal pressures surrounding gender identity and masculinity. The aftermath of Jason Collins' trial and conviction left an indelible mark on all parties involved, and the ripples of the case were felt in multiple spheres: personal, familial, betrayal, and societal. For Jason, life after the trial was marked by reflection and remorse. Initially, he maintained that he had acted in the heat of the moment, but after spending time in prison and receiving therapy, his narrative began to shift. In several interviews conducted later in his sentence, Jason admitted that he could never fully come to terms with the gravity of his actions, stating that there were times when he would lie awake at night, haunted by the thought that he had ended the life of someone he loved. He expressed regret over not allowing himself the time to process his feelings when he first learned about AA's transgender identity. It became clear in later interviews that Jason's initial shock and anger had overridden any semblance of rationality, leading him down a tragic path. Prison life was challenging for Jason, and while he found solace in therapy, he also struggled with feelings of isolation. His high-profile case left him vulnerable to public scrutiny, and he often felt the weight of being labeled a murderer by the media. However, Jason's reflections over time appeared to lead him to an understanding of the complexities of his emotions, and he came to believe that his actions were not just a result of betrayal, but also of deep-seated societal pressures. Jason's case became a subject of study in psychological circles, with experts using it to discuss issues of toxic masculinity, societal expectations, and emotional intelligence. For AA's family, the aftermath of the trial was a journey through grief and the determination to honor their daughter's memory. They were relieved by the conviction, though the loss remained immeasurable. AA's mother and father became vocal advocates for transgender rights, particularly focusing on creating safe spaces for transgender individuals in intimate relationships and raising awareness about the dangers of secrecy and deception in these situations. They established the A.A. Collins Foundation, which worked to support survivors of domestic violence and those affected by gender identity-related conflicts. AA's close friend Laura Martinez also played a key role in shaping the post-trial narrative. As a staunch advocate for transgender rights, Laura continued to speak publicly about AA's life, focusing on her courage and strength rather than the circumstances of her death. Laura became a key figure in the movement to bring awareness to the risks faced by transgender individuals in relationships and the lack of societal understanding surrounding transgender issues. She also pushed for better mental health resources for people going through the transition process, as well as educational initiatives for young people to foster more inclusive attitudes. AA's tragic death, though it cast a long shadow, became a defining moment in both the LGBTQ+ rights movement and broader conversations about gender, identity, and societal expectations. In the years following her passing, AA's family, friends, and advocates worked tirelessly to ensure that her story would not be forgotten and that it would inspire positive change. The creation of the A.A. Collins Foundation was one of the key steps in preserving her legacy. The foundation provided financial assistance for transgender individuals seeking medical or legal help, offered counseling services for people dealing with gender dysphoria, and funded scholarships for transgender youth. Through this foundation, AA's family hoped to provide the resources and support that might have helped their daughter in her own struggles and to create a safer world for those facing similar challenges. On a broader scale, AA's death became a catalyst for legislative change. Many activists, moved by the circumstances surrounding her death, lobbied for stronger hate crime protections for transgender individuals. Their efforts resulted in the introduction of several new laws in different states, making it illegal to discriminate against transgender people in housing, employment, and public accommodations. The case also ignited debates about how law enforcement, society, and the media handle incidents involving transgender individuals, especially in cases of violence or crime. In the realm of media and entertainment, AA's story also contributed to a shift in the portrayal of transgender people. Her life and death inspired writers, filmmakers, and actors to focus on telling more authentic and empathetic stories about transgender individuals, aiming to shed light on their humanity rather than reducing them to stereotypes or sensationalist narratives. Documentaries, podcasts, and books about AA's life and death became essential resources for people seeking to understand the struggles faced by transgender people in intimate relationships and society at large. AA's story also prompted a national conversation about toxic masculinity, as the reaction to her death was often tied to Jason's feelings of betrayal and humiliation. Many began to examine the way society conditions men to react to perceived weakness or threats to their masculinity, urging a shift towards healthier, more emotionally intelligent ways of coping with life's challenges. Ultimately, AA's legacy was one of transformation. While her death was heartbreaking, It sparked vital conversations about acceptance, love, and the complexities of gender identity. Her story continues to inspire activism, education, and a commitment to creating a more inclusive society where the lives of transgender individuals are respected, valued, and protected.